So thank you all for allowing us the opportunity to be here and to present this to you. We love this project, which hopefully you will come to love it as well. This is a project that Grimshaw and Gruen have been engaged with for a while. And in fact, our team has been engaged together even longer. This is a quick project timeline that kind of shows you what the entire process is. The project has been in the works for quite a while, going through an entitlement process. We've picked up, obviously, for the design and construction, although we were also involved in a bit of the CEQA process as well. And transit services in our future to the airport. Gruen and Grimshaw first partnered together in about 2012 to work on the Union Station master plan. This is an image of what we were conceiving of in this project. Really great working experience, blending Grimshaw's great international design thinking with our planning, landscape, and project management and technical skills. And we found that we made a really great team. And so we went looking for other projects to do that could actually get constructed. So we are here today to talk about this latest in the Metro network on the Crenshaw line, which also connects to the Green Line, and in the farther off future to the Sepulveda line, which will go to the San Fernando Valley. So why don't you go to the next here? So when I talk about this as serving the airport, I have to qualify that it's serving the airport from 1.5 miles away from the airport. There was a great bit of study between Metro and LAWA trying to get this transit to actually land within the central terminal area. That did not happen. And so the Crenshaw line was born in this location. And, but however, there is this automated people mover that LAWA is building that is going to connect to the station. So we will have a complete circuit in 2024. So the station and the APM are slated to be completed at the same time. All of this is, of course, intended to allow Angelenos to access the airport via transit like other grown-up cities around the country and the world. And clearly we need this to alleviate our very massive congestion that we have, sadly, even to a lesser extent, but still in COVID times. So this new station is going to facilitate access for employees of LAX, employees of the various businesses supporting the airport, as well as passengers coming to and from the airport. It's a facility that'll serve people who have actually no intention of having anything to do with the airport and are just using this as a means to change modes of transit as well. So this is a multimodal facility with buses, light rail, and connection to the automated people mover. So we have been working on this for a very long time. Projects as challenging and complicated as this take a long time. It's not strictly about the building. It's also about just the mechanics of coordinating this major heavy infrastructure. And it's coordinating this with several other projects that are in the area. So I already mentioned the Crenshaw line, which is being built right now. This is a new station that will go on it. So it was planned without the station, and we are injecting this station in it. The automated people mover, which is under construction by another group of people working for LAWA. A lot of streetscape work. For anyone who's been in that area should know that there's massive development going on in the roadways, improving the pedestrian realm. And all of this takes a great amount of coordination and a great amount of time. So it's about 6 years from when we started the programming until when this thing will actually be in construction. But we're so optimistic because we're at the tail end of that 6 years, and the project is currently out to bid, and we expect to have a contractor on board before the end of the year. So this project has very high expectations and aspirations. This is not just another transit facility. It's really intended to be this great connectivity to other bus lines, to all of the metro bus lines, but also the bus lines for all of the various cities in the area, including South Bay, Santa Monica, et cetera. It's connecting to the Crenshaw line, but it also ends up being a terminus for the Green Line. So the Green Line is extending here. I already mentioned that there's a future Sepulveda line plan. So all of that connectivity is really part and parcel to this. It really needs to be a fully integrated station. But it has to have exceptional passenger experience. So this, the Metro Board really wanted this to elevate the passenger experience and be something that they liken to a Union Station of the West, on the west side of Los Angeles. So this is a very important hub for them. It couldn't just be an ordinary station. It really needed to have greater architectural aspirations and really be a front door to the city for all the transit users, a front door to LAX, and a really visionary transit facility. One of the things that we just wanted to throw in here for just some background before we dig into the actual architecture is some of the complications with a major bus facility. So with a major bus facility, you want to always exit passengers on the right-hand side of the door of the vehicle. But we also wanted to have a plaza that minimizes the contact between passengers, pedestrians, and buses. And in order to do that, we have a center island. So the buses are rotating around that island. And the circulation ends up being very, very critical to try and minimize the intersections between the buses themselves, allow greater flexibility for the buses to get in and out in case there's a bus out of service or some other emergency, and to find a way to get the passengers from that center island into the station in a manner that avoids any contact with buses, with the buses. And Andrew's going to show you how we've accomplished that next up here. So, Andrew.
Great, thanks, Deborah. There's quite a bit to get through here, so hopefully I'll be interrupted at least a couple of times by Deborah to help with the cadence of this, so you don't need to listen to me monologuing for too long. But as Deborah's already said, this project is very near and dear to Grimshaw's heart, both within the Californian Los Angeles studio here, but also within our global portfolio. We're a firm that's had a lot of experience in transit design and railway design and multimodal transit stations. And this for us is such a unique and wonderful opportunity. It really does resonate amongst our global group and has a really high profile. So I'm going to walk you through the evolution of the design over the course of what seemed to be a very compressed amount of time, but has past a number of years, as Deborah has said. But with large-scale complex projects such as this, there's certainly a lot to get through and a lot of stakeholders and complexity to manage and unpick. So what I'm going to start with is a really quick overview here with these pictograms that are starting to talk about the importance of the role of the airport metro connector in establishing a sense of place and a threshold of experience, because a lot of people will be now experiencing their arrival at the AMC as their first real engagement with the city of Los Angeles, outside of the slightly more international experience of being in an airport terminal. And we've shifted that threshold slightly. So we've been thinking carefully about what that means in terms of the sense of arrival and the connection to the fabric of the city on both arrival and on departure. And for us, it's a really interesting opportunity because a lot of the significant gateways that currently exist within the terminal area of LAX are now being somewhat artificially replaced with our station as the kind of key point of arrival and threshold, because we're now moving out of the CT GTA area within a kind of concealed environment or with an enclosed environment from the terminal buildings to the airport, to the automated people mover, and then arriving at our station. So we needed a scheme that embodied your sense of arrival and a connection to Southern California as a place, and also to work as that gateway and threshold that other elements within LAX had previously. I think the other point of significance to note before we dig into the architectural language and character is the fact that this project was unique in Metro in the sense that it sat outside their typical guidelines when it came to Metro station portals, and the constraints and the requirements of the typical transit stations that we see in the city of LA, which enabled us to, again, meet the design aspirations that Deborah's outlined here at the start to create a more unique, specialized and potentially more memorable transit environment. And then the third thing that I wanted to touch on here is that there's not a huge amount by way of contextual clues for us to riff off in terms of the station identity and the station language, because the current state of the site, we've got a quick snapshot here of the northern and the southern end, and each of them are in a position where it reinforces the fact that this project is catalytic in nature and isn't being placed into a very kind of dense urban context with a number of surrounding buildings or adjacent fabric that would help inform the identity and language of the building. So right back at the start, before we really conceived of a design identity for this, we started musing around the idea of visual and spatial connections between the different modes of transit to help with orientation and wayfinding, and really the exploration of the way in which this might not be conceived of as a building, but as an extension of the public realm that at times needs to provide weather protection, shelter, shade, and passenger comfort, but isn't conceived of in a traditional sense as a building with a finite threshold and footprint. So we were exploring the ideas of layered component-based elements, where we may have some conditioned spaces that provide amenity and retail, we may have some protections through canopies, and we may have some elevated structures to aid passenger movement, and we may need some solar screening and acoustic screening for the station, but not necessarily a kind of tight building envelope, which enables us to have a more unique relationship to the immediate environment and also to the soft landscaping, which ultimately becomes a really important aspect of this that we're going to invite Dean to talk about later in the presentation. The other thing that we're obviously really cognizant of and have a great deal of experience in is understanding the way in which we can position the various modes of transit within the site constraints and position those elements in such a way that it really simplifies the passenger experience and assists with intuitive wayfinding, so that people using the building, there's an element of legibility and visual connection so that they appreciate and understand where they are, where they need to get to, and we don't have a heavy reliance on signage to direct people so that they're able to navigate and work their way around. So we started to explore, again, even well before we had a design party here or even a site organizational principle, we started to explore some of those experiential qualities and the elemental approach of creating shelter and protection, address and enclosure with connection to environment and connection to landscape. And then started to look at how we might arrange these components with the geometry of the site into a manner that really aids the use of the building. So this is a very simple diagram through here, but we had some fixed design constraints. First of all, the alignment of Aviation Boulevard and the northern extent of the site is bound by Arborvitae. we had the alignment of the Crenshaw line, the new Crenshaw line, and also the APM station at that point had achieved its reference design status, and we understood where the footprint of the station was going to be, if not the exact detail of how we were going to interface and interact with that building. And the unique geometry of the site actually had a southern point, which is quite important from an urban context, because a lot of the vehicle movements through here and a lot of the circulation patterns actually provide from the highway network an arrival from the south. So an important component in terms of the identity and announcement of the building, but very narrow in terms of its footprint. And all of these things come together in a central decision-making point, which we've used the nomenclature here of the hub. And it's at that point where the key decision is made as to how you orientate yourself in the space and how you move on to the next mode of transit. So from the bus facility onto the metro lines, or from the APM into the bike hub and on, everything comes through this central mixing valve, the hub. For us, in transit, one of the critical aspects there is to prioritize both the passenger experience and the passenger safety. So the manner in which we've been able to do this is through grade separation and having that metro hub at an elevated level so that we can have vehicles, buses, and trains circulating at grade, and have the passengers circulating above that level and very simply able to drop down as and when needed to access these modes of transit. But it means that we never really promote shared surfaces between vehicles and pedestrians. So it's a much safer solution. It was also quite, I think, an obvious design party, because we're dealing with an automated people mover that's at an elevated viaduct condition, and we need to be able to get up to that height to access the APM as it runs through. So some really early musings on the design identity of these components, and after we established the idea of locating the bus plaza to the north, having this central decision-making point in the middle, the access to the Crenshaw line metro station adjacent, and the bike hub on the south, and the way that that connects into the automated people mover for LAX, we were then starting to think about how we might express these elements as potentially standalone building forms that are recognizable and identifiable, or perhaps there would be more nuanced canopy structures that are announcing some of the visual connections through there. And again, looking at this bottom left-hand diagram, we were playing with the idea of consolidating the footprint into a more intense building directly adjacent to the people mover. But then ultimately, when we started to understand the flow and the movements of passengers and the provision of amenity, particularly around shade and shelter, we struck upon a design party that reinforced the primary lines of passenger circulation and developed this design identity of linear strips that are in the primary direction of movement that naturally suggest and follow the flow of the way in which people circulate and move around the site. So this is a illustration of our ultimate station condition to just help orientate everyone. So in this case, north is to the right-hand side, and we can see the labels on the road here showing aviation, arborvitae, and the various components. So at the northern side, we have our bus plaza. We have this central decision-making point, which we call the hub in the middle. Directly to the eastern side here, the western side here is the metro line and access, and then the automated people mover elevated station, which is actually straddling aviation, is sat in this location through here. So we'll kind of build up the components now in an illustrative way, so we can help demonstrate the way in which we kind of unpicked this complex puzzle. And Deborah had shown on an earlier slide the very challenging knot of potentially conflicting movements that we've needed to unpick to create circulation patterns that work for pedestrians and for the different modes of transit. And it's represented here in a very simplified way, where we're able to have a bus circulation plaza that creates an island platform for access, the central hub through here, the platforms at grade for the Crenshaw line, and a bike hub on our southern point of the site through here. And then as we move up in the levels, first of all, we felt it was important for us to ground the project in a generous and I think positive soft landscaping solution that improved the streetscape and provided that additional amenity as well. So again, we'll hear from Dean about the key role that landscape plays in the project. But moving
and Andrew, just before you go on,
yeah.
it also played a security role as well, providing a physical buffer so that people didn't try and make their way to that bus plaza off of the sidewalk.
Yep. And also some environmental benefits, because it enabled us to utilize some of that space for solar power generation as well. So as much as possible, we like our individual design components to be meeting multiple criteria or satisfying multiple criteria. So here is a very simple circulation diagram that is illustrating the manner in which we've been able to connect passengers to the bus plaza, bring them up to an elevated concourse route that enables them to safely move, separated from the vehicles and the buses that are moving below, and the trains of the metro platforms as well. And it shows on those primary directions the key kind of directional travel, and then the secondary cross passages within that hub that bring us across to access the light rail platforms. We then look at providing the amenity as needed, distributed throughout the space, so that we're able to allow for people to occupy the entirety of the station without needing to come to a single point for a food and beverage offer or a retail offer, for example, or for facilities. So we're able to distribute that across the site. And importantly, the provision of a really, I guess, progressive and forward-thinking provision of cycle, store and repair with a metro bike hub through here, which I think is absolutely the right initiative as a signal of intent of how they want to support the cycle network in this region and the wider network beyond. The importance of the landscaping will become apparent as we talk through this to create this moment of respite, calm, and opportunity for dwelling and experience. And then we took a look at what perhaps the bare minimum might be for us to provide vertical enclosure. And here again, in a very elemental way, it's really the provision of passenger comfort for acoustic and solar heat gain, and to provide those elements as screening elements, really, rather than a traditional building enclosure as such around that kind of key central hub area. And then ultimately an architectural language that's directly informed by the functionality of the building, which is the key lines of circulation and movement from the passengers, and everything is informed by that to help reinforce that directional movement and to be a celebration of the kind of kinetic movement of the occupants of the building. And then the final piece of the puzzle, delivered by the Lauer and Lynx team, is the APM station that has a direct interface with our building. So the components, again, this time looking a little further towards the south from the northeastern corner, we have the bus plaza, this metro hub section, the light rail section, and then the bike hub further to the south. So I think I've spent most of the time on those axonometric diagrams describing the plan arrangement. So I might just gloss over these plans here, but we can come back if there are specific questions about the programmatic arrangement and the vertical circulation and how that works through the building. But ultimately what you see here is that we're providing enough footprint to support the circulation and use of the building, and then prioritizing space and the provision of natural daylight above creating vast expanses of occupiable space. So we've really enabled a building that spatially flows quite organically. And the reason that we prioritize the volume in that regard is, again, to help the users make visual connections to where they go to. So when they arrive at the ground floor or they arrive at the top of the bus plaza, they're able to see exactly where they're headed, and it reinforces the ease of movement through the building. Okay, so that kind of brings us to what was our first cut of a design identity for the station. And at this point, we've spent a lot of time really working hard on the organizational principles and the diagramming, if you will, so that we are doing the best possible job we can of an efficient layout that is really intuitive in terms of finding your way around, and is really efficient in terms of the building footprint and the areas in which we're enclosing and using energy to condition versus where we're just providing a sheltered external experience. And the building identity at this point is being led by these dynamic ribbons running through the site to reinforce the movement. And then the infills are provided to create that, that shelter that I was talking about previously. And at this point, you know, we felt that that was absolutely the right approach, is to ensure that this is a very leaky enclosure, and that serves us well for the environmental performance of the building, but it also deals quite well with issues such as the exhausting of smoke, for example, within the building. So we were quite content with the kind of the primary moves that we made. But one of the things that we got to at this point, when there was a moment for a pause and a bit of introspection around the design identity, was the ambition to perhaps create a more signature piece that would reinforce that passenger movement and create a more sinuous method of containing, creating, and indicating a sense of direction, travel, and enclosure for the building. I think the other thing that we were thinking about is structurally whether there was a greater level of efficiency through this central area to make a kind of more contiguous and meaningful connection structurally between the canopies, so that they were doing less of a cantilever job and more of a portalized sort of structure job through here. So we had a moment at this point to review where we'd gotten to in terms of the language, and whether it was satisfying the client's ambitions and the demands of this being what we hope to be an incredibly high caliber piece of transit architecture, not just for Southern California, but for the entire region and the nation. And we felt that we could push a little bit harder and challenge ourselves to perhaps loosen up some of the formal relationships that the building had, and create something that was perhaps spoke more directly to the sense of place and the historic architectural resonance of Southern California. So we started developing, you know, almost pulling back to the scribble and sketch stage, and started developing a slightly looser approach to the way in which we're encapsulating space and defining space, and started thinking of our canopies as a slightly more dynamic and fluid element that was able to flex and perform different things, and perhaps turn down at edges to create a greater sense of enclosure, and transform along its length to indicate a change in the nature of the space or the function of the building. The other thing that we felt is that we wanted to make sure that we weren't merely cutting our building short in the way that it interfaced with the viaduct for the automated people mover from LAX. And this is a very, very simple diagram, but we felt it was quite important to make sure that on the southern and northern side of the viaduct that we had this more sinuous and a continuous experience to stitch all of the station elements together without this this kind of break in the language. So we started thinking about the central hub space and the importance of that as a key volume and a key point of decision making. And you know, we became very enamored with the idea of almost treating this, you know, elevating the experience to a gallery-esque, top lit, yet diffuse environment within that volume, and using that rhythm as an opportunity to punctuate the language that may enable us to create more of a singular moment within the space, because it was around about this time that we started working with our public artist who had been selected to collaborate on the project as well. And we felt that this hub space had an opportunity to adapt and work in that way. So again, very fat pen, simple sketch here, but we started thinking of these ribbons in a slightly more dynamic way that were following the flow of the passengers, and then having the ability for them to actually flex and adapt. So through this central hub area, perhaps they can peel apart slightly more, perhaps they can rise up a little bit higher and bring in that natural daylight that enables us to signify that this is a key space within the building. And then that same canopy would be able to transform and wrap underneath the concrete viaduct of the automated people mover for a continuous experience that's stitching the platform environment and the bike hub together in a singular move. So we ended up with a more dynamic roofscape that was picking up on those themes and was starting to create a greater level of emphasis for that central hub space. At the same time, we started to liberate the building from being a very, I think, formal and singular geometry in terms of defining these ribbons as a kind of closed volumetric extrusion, and started coming back to this elemental language of a more flexible layering of skins and surfaces around a skeletal artifice that actually creates the building identity. So to put it in other words, maybe we could express the structure more and allow the soffit panels to be a little looser in their relationship, so that they're a bit more free to dance about and create moments of significance and experience through the space. So these are some of the early developments of those renderings, and what it suggested to us was a couple of things that we became quite excited about. The first of which is that it enabled the transformation of the soffit skin to again be a stronger visual cue to draw people and lead people through the space. It enabled us to express the structural fins of these canopy and roof structure elements in a way that starts to hark back to traditional post-beam and mid-century modern construction that exists in Southern California. And it also enabled us to create this diffuse top-lit environment that we could punctuate with a more significant moment within the hub to create a greater sense of drama. So this is a view from standing within the central hub space. We're now looking north, so the bus plaza is off the end of the view here, and we're in that central hub space, and you can see those fin elements that are running through, that are providing that connection to the outdoor environment and bringing in this natural daylighting into the space, but in a way that provides some degree of self-shading and diffuse lighting rather than vast expanses of unmitigated and uncontrolled sunlight. And it enables us to widen out and raise that central section through here. As you can see, the soffit panels peeling away to indicate the significance of this as a key decision point within the circulation. And the oculus, this moment of interruption of that rhythm, is there for and the integration of the artwork, which we'll get to in a few minutes' time. So you can start to see here the difference in the previous iteration of the scheme and where we are now, that that soffit panel, by liberating the direct connection and the formal definition of the canopies and liberating the skin, it enables us to have the element cascade down, pull through, and take you on up to the station for the automated people mover, or take you all the way through to the bus hub beyond. And it also enables us to kind of turn down and create a sense of enclosure on the ends. And then in another view that we'll share later on in the animation as well, you'll see that in other locations it peels up so that you can make a visual connection to the APM platform above as well. So it becomes a kind of more dynamic actor that enables us to indicate different conditions within the station. So when we were making this move, we're cognizant of the fact that it introduces complexity, and what we want to do is optimize the value that we're getting out of this approach by trying to achieve that desired, more expressive and organic geometry, but achieve it through rectilinear means, realizable and economic means. So we took great pains to look at using as many planar panels as possible, and to think about standardization through the process where we could, so that we're able to create this dynamism, but using as much as possible just simple rectilinear plates. So we've deliberately moved against developing any panels with complex panels with double curvature and complex geometries. It also enables us, the canopy material that we've ultimately gone for is a stainless steel mesh, which I think for me personally, having worked on a bunch of stations in the past, I'm super excited about this, because it's actually, it's not particularly common, and there's a great likelihood that we'll have an element of kind of diffuse read through here that again is placing the structure and celebrating the structure of the building and the functionality of the building, but is creating this kind of very delicate veil through here, which I think will really set this project apart as a really memorable passenger experience to move through. I've kind of said enough on this, so Deborah, I might hand to you to talk about how you actually deliver this in the real world.
Sure, and just one comment on the mesh panels, but they also serve an acoustic purpose as well. So, like Andrew said earlier, everything has multiple meanings on this project, and the geometry of the panels are no different. So, so it did come time to try and figure out how to take this beautiful Rhino model design from Grimshaw and translate it into something that can be inserted into a Revit model, which is the delivery system for this project. And we have a very, very brilliant BIM manager who scratched his head for quite a while trying to figure this out, but he did. And so he transitioned in several steps, the 3D model from Rhino into Revit using first Grasshopper, which was then exported to Excel. The Excel was imported into Dynamo, and with the data in a Dynamo script, we were able to convert it into Revit and to get Revit geeky, create adaptive families for each panel. So we were able to use fairly conventional methods in this process, and a fairly complicated process to get to a place where we really understand these panels. And if we had used conventional means, it would have taken us weeks or months to do this. Once we figured out how to do it, the workflow allowed this to be automatically creating these panels within 15 minutes. So it was really something that could not have been done, a decade ago can be done now. And within Revit, even though this is despite the simplicity and the planar panels that we have, we've got about 5,800 different panels on this project in the various surfaces. But also recognizing that these canopies are over 1,000 feet long a piece. And so it was really a fantastic way to be able, you can go to the next slide too, a fantastic way to be able to rationalize these panels and in a relatively complex geometry that gets simplified through the use of the technology.
Great, thank you. So I think one of the critical design issues when looking at transit-based architecture is really prioritizing decluttering the space and thinking very strategically about the way in which you can create systems and designated locations to accommodate all of the necessary technical provision and equipment, an understanding of the way in which speakers, lighting, cameras, all of the gnarly bits and pieces that are required to ensure that this is a high functioning space needs to be really well coordinated and really well conceived of to ensure that we are creating environments that look very clean and very simple, because the criticality of that is not an aesthetic desire from an architect. It's actually from the passenger experience standpoint. The cleaner and the more simple the volumetric expression of the architecture within the space is, the more readily understood the circulation movements and the legibility of the signage is going to be. So it's of critical importance for the successful functioning of the building, and it doesn't help that it also ends up with a better looking design, because we've got a very well coordinated series of integrated services through here. So the relaxation, as I spoke about, the relaxation of those soffit panels to the structure also gave us opportunities for reveals that we've placed a very subtle highlight color within. We have this kind of champagne colored infill through here to add a little bit of warmth and character to the space, but it also gives us these wonderful opportunities to incorporate both architectural feature and functional lighting within the space that exist within those reveals, and enable us to bring through conduits and connections, and to really clean up the way in which the building is serviced. Again, just prioritizing the volume and the experience and the legibility of the space, so that people are naturally kind of literally drawn up towards the light, help circulate and navigate through the space. And I think one of the things that we just wanted to touch on briefly here is, we've been talking a lot about that central hub, and when we've made those design moves within the canopy geometry through here, it also gave us an opportunity to revisit continuing that language and having a coherent response for the light rail section. And what is worth mentioning here is, concurrent with that exploration, there was also an appraisal of the requirements for the platforms for the metro light rail station. So Deborah, did you want to talk about this a little bit as well? Because it was quite a significant moment in the project.
Yeah, so I will say we were midway through construction documents when all of these changes came to pass, which is not exactly an ideal moment, but it was the right thing to do for the project, to step back and reevaluate. And when we first embarked on the project, the very first thing that our team wanted to do was to change the width of the platforms that had been planned by Metro. And the reason that they were planned by Metro is that this Crenshaw line was already under construction. And so they had planned to fit platforms within the existing infrastructure of the rail and they really didn't want to disrupt that in the middle of the Crenshaw line construction. So one of the constraints on us was to work within those existing rails and not rearrange the rails. But you know, we have a great client, and there was a moment when we had someone who had the will to really push that and say, is this really the right thing for us to do? And I'm going to give a shout out to Paul Wang, who is our project manager for Metro, because it was really his coming onto the project and saying, really, guys, this is what we're spending all this time and money. Shouldn't we do the right thing by having a giant center platform? And so it was a great moment for us to stop, reevaluate that. It gave Andrew time to, was very serendipitous. It was the same moment when he was having these thoughts about the architecture of the canopy and the significance of that. And so the center platform came to be, and it's really the right thing for the project. It does require us to reconstruct the rail that is currently been laid, but it will ultimately be the appropriate thing for this very pivotal station.
Well said. I think it was great that we got to the right solution. I think there was a lot of it was a unanimous position. I think everyone appreciated that this was a big improvement in the layout, and what it enabled us to do is it somewhat simplified the access and the circulation for the light rail station area, and it enabled us to more directly continue the architectural expression and language that we're establishing through the hub into this space because of the position, primarily because of the position of the columns, that we could now land them in that location, and we could bring the daylight into the center of the space, which is where the platforms are, which is where the passengers are, which is the ideal location. So it enabled us to, again, following our principles and the design motif elsewhere, the canopy and the volume directly responds to the passenger movements. And here, this is a cutaway cross section through that area, and it's showing that the circulation at the mezzanine level, which connects across back to our hub space, is where we have the double height volume. And then our roof canopy actually folds down underneath to mimic the movement of the passengers down the vertical circulation and onto the central platform, but simultaneously is ducking down to avoid that oversailing concrete viaduct of the APM as well. So it enabled us to also create an identity on the western elevation that is very reminiscent and cohesive with what we're doing on aviation as well, because this building very much is viewed in the round and created, again, a dynamic environment here that was in concert with what we were doing within the hub. So the same design principles that I described previously about the way in which the soffit panels are responsive and are opening up to that moment of decision making and circulation is apparent through here, and we continue those soffit panels over the top to emphasize that linear movement along the platforms and the trains. Okay, so we're kind of getting towards the part where I'd like to hand over to talk, so Dean is able to talk about the landscaping. So just a couple of additional pieces from me. The first is pulling outside of the building. You can see that the external identity of the scheme here is directly informed by the space that we've created for the passenger experience within the station, within the hub, rather than this being a sort of outside-in design. It's very much the announcement of the building to the external world is a further manifestation of the principles that we've applied within that central hub. So here is the southern tip of the building, and you may recall I mentioned this as a bit of a flagship moment where the project announces itself from this southern approach. And it's great that it's the bike hub. As I said, it's a great signal of intent that Metro is really reinforcing and encouraging the use of cycling as a key mode of transit. And the canopy in this case is ducking underneath the access to the APM and then carrying on through to act as a signifier and to continue that language on. And then as we pass underneath the viaduct moving north along Aviation, we have what is the kind of primary street address, if you will, for the station, which is the location of our drop-off facility here as well, and provides our kind of longest length of facade through here. And the design approach for this element is, again, to continue that idea of elemental screening and to be, I think, to have a resonance towards that dynamic planar shifting of the building. But it's also folding in such a way that we're looking to pull that elevation back a little bit to create some element of eave overhang through here to get at least a small amount of self-shading during the day to help mitigate some of that solar heat gain from the approach. But what we wanted to do is make sure that there was a significant amount of visual transparency through here, because we feel that the movement of passengers and the movement of the people through the space is really the identity of the building and what we want to celebrate. So as much as possible, we're trying to put that on show.
And really quickly, because we're running out of Dean's time here, this is inherently a very sustainable building. We've talked about the transparency, the daylight, the airflow. This will be the first LEED Zero transit center. A LEED Zero is a fairly new rating system, meaning that we're generating all green energy, either on-site or purchasing green power. And we have a fair amount of energy generated on site, certainly not 100% of what we need, but around 40% of what we need. And the rest of it is supplemented through the grid, which is also green, and will allow us to be a LEED Zero building.
Great. So I'm cognizant of time, so I'll do this very quickly. We spoke earlier about the integration of artwork, which is a really important part to help, I think, create a strong sense of place. The successful bidder for this was Glenn Kino's studio, and Glenn had spoken to us about the idea of a transcendent journey, an impossible journey, and we worked together to create a formal piece within the space that this is very much a placeholder, but it starts to show the relationship of that oculus to his sculptural proposal that will be a celebration of travel and journey, and will be a series of craft that embodies movement and journey and passage. So we're really excited about that. As I said, this is just a placeholder, and all will be revealed to the public in due course when he's ready. But we're excited about also the prominence and the importance of this piece within the space. So we haven't talked all that much about the bus plaza, and that's the perfect segue to hand to Dean. And the one point that I'd like to just make on this is that from the outset, we were very adamant that we create an environment here that is high amenity for the ridership for the buses. And we think that it's incredibly important. You know, traditionally, this is maybe a ridership and a demographic that has been underserved. And I think it's very pertinent in these times of social justice that it's really valuable that we've been able to carve out this wonderful environment that has amenity that prioritizes the passenger experience for the bus ridership. So it's something that as a project team we're really proud of, and Dean's going to talk through how we've achieved that.
In 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So as Andrew said, we really wanted to create a variety of public spaces, whether it's the bus plaza or the metro plaza, whether you're arriving on foot or bike or the LRT or the APM. We really wanted to make it work for all users. And as Deborah was saying, this was the front door to Los Angeles. We wanted to use the landscape to sort of tell the story on the AMC site, the story of the landscape that was there before we got there, and the landscape that it is now, the sort of the landscape today, the multicultural melting pot that we are, and the melting pot of the landscape as well, and how it can be restorative in nature as well. So to create a sense of well-being for people that are, they're arriving, they're going from one transportation mode to the next. So we want to help them calm, give them a sense of well-being, and also in the site to increase infiltration, to reduce energy demand. And so our concept as we went through was from California then to what California is today. So as you go to the next slide, sort of applying that to the different parts of the site. The perimeter of the site, we really did these perimeter berms that sort of hearken to the foothills in the distance with the native grasses and the large specimen trees, as you see in the picture there, that would really help mitigate the view shed as you look into the site. You really want to see the architecture sort of pop up above these berms. And then within the site as well, California native pollinator a garden as well, with the PV panels and the bioswales that would create that pollinator site with beneficial effects on the native pollinator populations. And this is just showing you really what the scale of that would be, and really showing the perimeter and sort of the buffering element of that garden. And then when you get within the middle of the site, in the bus plaza, the raised planters would showcase a collection of vibrant and colorful plants that would be sort of plants from all over the world, that California adapted plants that would create this interior bus plaza that would be sort of separated from where you would wait for the buses in other parts of the plaza area. But if you go to the next slide, sort of gives you an idea of, we had to coordinate with the architects as well to create these differing areas of whether the shade is created by the canopy or the shade is created by the trees. And it's really talking to metro facilities as well as the different types of trees that would be used. We also wanted to use the architectural language that was being established to sort of take that onto the ground plane and create another layer of intuitive wayfinding into the hardscape as well. So that would be as we move forward into the hardscape concept. You can see in these sort of study models from very at the beginning, sort of showing that idea, and then also showing sort of what the planters might look like, and showing that differing spaces, whether you're sort of waiting for the bus and you have a longer wait, and there's differing areas with tables and chairs and other types of areas to wait for your transportation. There was also a fair amount of coordination that had to happen with agencies. There was a bike facility that had to happen along Alameda that was part of the EAR. A multi-use path or separated path. If you go to the next slide, there were a lot of iterations that we went through to sort of create the streetscape along Alameda, whether that's a two-way bike path that's separated from the pedestrian path by it's elevated, or if it's separated with site elements, or at some point we had detectable paving, or it was a shared space. We had different agencies' demands and sort of challenges as we had to balance what those desires were with what LAWA wanted, with what Metro wanted, and what the city wanted. LADOT, of course, had different ideas about the dimensions of what the bike path needed to be and how it needed to be separated. DWP, there was a scattergood utility line that they felt like the trees needed to be a certain distance away from. And then, of course, BSS had their own ideas of what it needed to be. So sort of getting everyone on board and getting everyone on the same page, and this is really what we ended up with, and getting everyone to the table and pleasing all parties. So anyway, there you go.
Thanks, Dean. Sorry that we always compress the landscape. It took a very large team of consultants to pull this all together, and we just wanted to give a little shout out to all of them. And we really needed all of their great expertise to accomplish this. So thank you all very much. Sorry we went a little over.
But happy to stay on, Gruen, as well.
Yeah.
So if people want to stay, we're not on a ticking clock here.
Yeah, for sure. Let's I think that if people want to stay, and if you guys can, that's great. templates. So just a reminder, if you have a question, to put it in the chat, and I will call upon you to say your question to the group, or you can raise your hand and I'll call upon you that way. It usually just takes one person to ask a question, and then we have a bunch. What an amazing project. This is just going to make lives change, not only for people who are flying in and out of LAX, but also for the people who work at LAX. Just their daily commute, like amazing. And as a former New Yorker, well, I still call myself a New Yorker, who only took the A or the E to the to JFK, I'm very excited about this. So so does anybody have any questions? You can raise your hand, or if you just want to unmute yourself, please do.
While people are thinking of incredibly challenging questions to ask us, I do have an animation that I might just let play in the background, if you don't mind, Gruen.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, is that coming through? Can you see that?
It is.
Okay, great. So yeah, happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Or I just might call on people to.
Or they can just watch.
Yeah.
The teacher method.
Yeah. And we will say, very nicely done by Kilograph. They worked very collaboratively with our team to create this. And a small little anecdote, they did not have, entourage with luggage did not exist, and they had to create it for purposes of doing this animation.
There's a market opportunity there, a commercial opportunity, Deborah.
Yes.
The design itself reminds me a lot of the Oculus. Was there any inspiration? Yeah, was there any inspiration?
Shaw did, perchance?
You did do it. Okay, I'm learning.
Well, that's. I'm glad. Yeah, that was fortuitous how that worked out. Yes, the Fulton Center is a project that that Grimshaw authored as well. So, yeah, there are some kind of elements in there. I think a number of our transit projects have a couple of through lines. So yeah.
And it was a great opportunity for our combined teams to travel to New York and really study what made that project really tick.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the amount of people who now go through there again reminds me of like pre 9/11. It's really awesome to see. Well, Kevin had a nice comment. Kevin, if you want to unmute yourself, and it's nice to see you here. Kevin said, excellent project, well deserved, and will be a great gateway to introduction to our city. Kevin, I see you unmuted yourself.
I can't say anything else but that.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, Deborah, it's a great project. Very, very elegant, and obviously will be the premier metro station in the city. And I think that's exactly what travelers coming in through LAX need to see.
Thank you for that. We're very excited about it.
Jesse, I see that you have a comment if you want to say anything else to the group.
Oh yeah, I was just mentioning that the Oculus also points back to some of the proposed designs for the APM stations, and that kind of unified architectural language between that, which, you know, this hub does well to bring all of those elements together.
Yeah, I'll just mention while we're passing this staircase that that was a critical coordination between the APM, which is governed by LA Department of Building and Safety, and our project to allow joint exiting through our stair. Otherwise, the APM was going to have to put another stair down on our plaza. And it took a fair level of effort to get the two agencies to come to same conclusion. Our station was not required to be sprinklered, and we ended up sprinklering it to eliminate an extra exit stair on the plaza. So it was for the good of the combined projects.
Will, you have a good question. Why don't you just ask it to the group?
Well, I mean, I know this is really more related to the people mover, but I'm just curious about, the parking garages there within the U-shaped horseshoe of LAX. What is the long-term vision? Maybe it's more of a law discussion more than metro, but.
Yeah, there are plans afoot. Well, it's complicated because it makes them a lot of money. So it's not as straightforward as them disappearing, but there are aspects that are being modified for the delivery of the APM, and there have been some inquiries that Lauer have made to the market about the provision of a convention hotel within the CTA area, and some other unsolicited proposals about how that reduced demand on the parking post-delivery of the APM may open up opportunities for landside development within the CTA. But there's nothing locked in at the minute, and that will be part of a wider visioning exercise that Lauer are undertaking for the entirety of their Gateway project.